So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Rishi Sunak apparently saying to the DUP, back my Brexit deal or face a united Ireland. So this is an interesting one that he's saying here. But yeah, Sunak has told the DUP to back his Brexit deal or face the prospect of a united Ireland as world leaders urge the party to get back to Stormont. The Prime Minister said the failure to make a devolved government in Northern Ireland work risked its place in the UK and would strengthen arguments for Irish unification. And, the DUP are really making democracy in Northern Ireland look like a joke. They're marginalising the kinds of voters who are not obsessed with unification or nationalism, the ones who might want to focus more on day-to-day issues like the cost of living crisis or the NHS in Northern Ireland. With Stormont closed, it does not help voters. Their cost of living and other support payments have been delayed because of the DUP's actions. There are other kind of important laws that have been delayed as well because we haven't gone back to direct rule or in collaboration with Ireland. It's kind of been, Northern Ireland's been kind of left to kind of sit there on its own because of the DUP. Even some of the businesses that are negatively impacted by the protocol seem positive in the changes the EU and the UK have discussed in the Windsor framework. And for the DUP to ignore the kind of middle of the road voters in a place like Northern Ireland, as polarised as it is a really bad idea. Bill Clinton, the former US president, told Donaldson, the DUP leader, that Sunak's Windsor framework was, quote, about the best deal you can get. It's time to get the show on the road, end quote. Meanwhile, Mr. Clinton suggested he would back the tweaking of the framework, quote, a little bit, end quote, adding, quote, I don't think there's anything quite like this square brackets deal, so I do hope it will be enough or that it can be tweaked a little bit. I certainly do, end quote. He said the new Brexit deal would make Northern Ireland a magnet for investment because it gave unique access to both the UK and EU markets. As Joe Biden, the US president, has stressed in Belfast last week, they removed the, quote, biggest roadblock, end quote, Brexit posed for Northern Ireland, which is obviously potentially an open border, kind of the end of the Good Friday Agreement. That's the problem Brexit posed. I'm not sure if the withdrawal agreement is still in draft form, but it's an agreement that can be tweaked, so Mr. Clinton is right. Also, the agreement is pretty unique because of the nature of Northern Ireland. I don't think there's any area in the world that's subject to customs and trade rules of an international supranational bloc. If there's stability in Northern Ireland, there will be a lot of manufacturers looking to set up shop there just because of the fact that they can export goods from Northern Ireland into the EU, no problem, into Great Britain, no problem, but they can also, so long as the Windsor framework actually works and reduces a lot of the checks, they have access to still Great Britain as a support, for kind of input goods, so they can manufacture certain things that maybe Ireland or other parts of the EU might struggle with. If there's stuff specifically made in the UK, probably be quite a limited list, I'll be honest, but the option's there if it exists. Varadkar, the Irish Prime Minister, said the President of the EU and the European Commission and European Council also called for an end to the DUP's 14-month Stormont boycott over the post-Brexit trading arrangements. Wow, 14 months, a long time, isn't it? Speaking at the end of the three-day university event to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, Mr. Sunak told the DUP, quote, I urge you to work with us to get Stormont up and running again. That's the right thing to do on its own terms. I'm convinced it's also the right thing to do for our union, end quote. He said the Northern Ireland Assembly has been mothballed for 9 of the last 25 years, which, quote, should be a source of profound concern, end quote. Quote, over the long term, that will not bolster the cause of unionism, end quote, he warned, saying the deadlock would convince people they would be better served as part of a united Ireland. And it's an abject failure, in my opinion, that Stormont has faced such long closures. For Northern Ireland to stay part of the UK, in my opinion, it has to be stable. The DUP and the Unionists have made it unstable. Lots of Unionist rage is being fuelled. Their anger at a trade border in the Irish Sea and the fear that more trade with Ireland makes unification more likely. But the protocol makes Northern Ireland different to the trade conditions in Ireland, an easy argument against unification for the Unionists if they wanted it. They just don't get that. This is not about the interests of Northern Ireland. This is about an identity crisis that the Unionists are having, and right now it makes Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland look like a more reasonable party. It also makes the Alliance Party look like a more reasonable party as well, because the brand of unionism is becoming toxic. Focusing on the cost of living crisis and getting the basic functions of democracy going, even going to, Sinn Féin going to the King's coronation, looking like a party that's more for the whole of Northern Ireland, not just for the nationalists, whilst the DUP have gone in the other direction, being dragged further into radical unionism by their base, looking like a party just for unionists or some radical unionists who want an end to the protocol, even if it means breaking the Good Friday Agreement. Can you see how the optics alone just don't look good? And, with what Rishi Sunak said, the idea that maybe a united Ireland would serve the people of Northern Ireland better, that will, I think, float into the minds of float into certain people's minds here, because, the Irish kind of parliamentary, or the Irish kind of governmental system hasn't been mothballed for 9 of the 25 years. I think it's run pretty well, despite the fact that there are still issues within Ireland, but it's nothing. I don't think they're anywhere near as bad as the problems we have in the United Kingdom. Sorry if my voice is going, I'm just still getting over the cold. So in Stormont elections in May last year, Sinn Féin, which wants a united Ireland, toppled the DUP to become the largest political party in the region for the first time in its history, and it did it against all odds, against a system that it's built kind of more for unionist parties. So that was very interesting. I remember covering it at the time. The Good Friday Agreement recognised the right of people on the island of Ireland to reunify if border polls in Ireland and Northern Ireland support it, and it, quote, appears likely, end quote, a majority of Northern Irish people would support it. The DUP refused to end its boycott even after Sunak agreed the Winchester Framework, which cut border checks on Irish goods because they did not believe it protects Northern Ireland's place in the UK. Varadkar said the people of Northern Ireland, quote, deserve a functioning executive, end quote, later telling reporters he would aim to talk to Mr Sunak about the prospect of providing new assurances to the DUP over the framework. He said the EU would, quote, obviously, end quote, consider a similar request for guarantees, but insisted the agreement would not be renegotiated, and that's something the EU have stuck to. And we've seen that in the Windsor Framework as well as the Northern Ireland Protocol, the kind of disputes that Lord Frosty made constantly, which is the EU said it wouldn't be renegotiated, and it's not. Von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, urged, quote, today's leaders to shape together the future of Northern Ireland, end quote, and she said, quote, the gateway to a bright future is open, all you need to do is walk through it, end quote. And we've got Big Jeffrey Donaldson saying, quote, it's a pity that gateway has bars and locks and checks and all the kinds of things we need to see removed if Northern Ireland is going to have unfettered access to our own internal market, end quote. And, for me it's frustrating, and something needs to point out to the DUP that other countries have internal trade borders, something we've discussed before. And in my opinion, I think Donaldson, should have taken the Windsor Framework as a win. Maybe he could have if his 6 tests were not absolutely comical. The DUP could have said we forced the EU to reduce the checks and made it easier for trade to flow from GB, and we still have access to the EU single market for goods, so this will really help our economy out. But instead they decide to push for things that they were never going to get. They seem to think that Westminster cares so much about Northern Ireland it would sacrifice everything to placate unionist hissy fits and identity crisis. But the issue is that the age of the British Empire is over. We can't strong-arm other countries anymore, not really. And that's something the DUP don't get. They could have decided to get a win here, an easy win on customs and other things. The Green Lane, for example. But no, they decided to score own goals again. It's sad for the people of Northern Ireland, and I do wonder what the thoughts are of the average kind of person in Northern Ireland that's not really a unionist or a nationalist. But as you can hear, my voice is really deteriorating, so I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.